Hello, everyone. Welcome to How to Make Sure Your Charts Are Worth 1,000 Words. Our speaker is Jameson Marriot. Um, he has his bachelor's degree in manufacturing engineering technology from Brigham Young University, where he discovered the Lean Six Sigma world. He went on to work as a quality engineer first, as an aerospace company, and then a defense contractor. Once entering the workplace, he found that he had an affinity and passion for metrics, data analysis, and creating accessible graphs. Um, some things that we need to talk about ahead of time for housekeeping rules. This is a 45-minute session, so it closes exactly at 11:45. Um, any questions that you have, please throw them in the chat, and then I will grab them at the end and bring them up and discuss them with Jameson. If we happen to run out of time, uh, with the networking session, you'll be able to get your questions answered there. And if you haven't been to these presentations before this, all the presentations that you see are available for download later on. So you'll be able to get a copy of this too. So James,
Sorry, you cut out there at the end there. Are you passing the ball?
yep,
Okay,
go right ahead.
perfect. Awesome. All right. Good to be with all of you. Yeah, let's jump right in. I've never done this virtually before. I've given this in person. I gave a very similar presentation at the World Quality Conference, and passionate about this subject, and so I made some changes for here, but excited to talk about this again today. So we're going to talk about why clear charts are crucial for the quality of every organization, some basic principles, and about removing distractions and why we want to do that. Clear graphs, in my mind, in order to run a really good quality organization, you need clear communication with everyone to help everyone adopt the quality objectives. So a clear graph is one that is not easily misunderstood, and one that someone can grasp quickly in a short amount of time. I feel like we have a TikTok generation coming up here that doesn't want to spend 5 minutes trying to decipher the information that you're trying to get across. So if we have clear graphics, that will help everyone get on board with issues that they're able to understand, because they can understand the graph quickly, and we don't try everyone's patience with things that don't help. They may kind of look cool, but don't necessarily help communicate the message that we're trying to get across. Quality has a great history of charts that we've kind of I don't know, we've glommed onto, right? We've kind of taken ownership of some of these charts a little bit: Pareto charts, run charts, histograms, and SPC charts. And what we're going to talk about today is not how to construct specific kinds of charts. We're going to talk about principles that can apply to any of these charts to help them be excellent. I want to start off with this quote from Dr. Tufte. Graphical excellence, this is what we're after today, is graphical excellence, is that which gives to the viewer the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time, with the least ink, or we could say pixels, with the least ink in the smallest space. So this is an optimization problem, and sometimes there's going to be trade-offs, but we're looking to maximize number of ideas people get from it, and minimize the amount of time it takes to read the graph, the amount of stuff on the graph, the ink being just the stuff that's there, and then the amount of space. I will say that in this kind of an environment, on a PowerPoint presentation, I tend to just fill the space. So some of these graphs are definitely going to be a little bigger than they necessarily need to be, but that's just because we're focusing on one graph at a time today. And especially in you know, if this is never going to be blown up big, on a projector or it's just going to be viewed on paper. Oftentimes graphs can be much smaller than what we need and still be perfectly legible. Okay, we're going to start with a basic concept here, zoom, and because we're going to need to build on it later. So the zoom here, this data is consumer price index data from BLS.gov, Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So this is something you can go on their website there and download. And when I kind of started down thinking about this presentation, inflation was really big in the news at that time. And so this is just something that came to mind. I don't have a particular story I'm trying to tell here, but we're going to use this for some of the first examples that we'll look at. But it is real data. So this is the price, average dollars per pound of white flour in the United States of America. And the way that I put this on this chart, you can see that it's a pretty flat line. At least that's what it looks like. The reason that it looks really flat, though, is that we've taken a zoomed out approach to look at the cost. The y-axis goes all the way up to $10, but the line doesn't go anywhere near that. I'd like you to just take a look at the line and come up with two numbers. What do you think the maximum value and the minimum value are on that line there? It kind of looks like there, right at the beginning, it's about the minimum, and it's a little hard to tell, but I think at the very end is the maximum. We'll get a better look at this in a second. So if we got those two numbers, we're going to take a much more zoomed in and also change the aspect ratio a little bit. You can see now the story completely changes about this price per pound of flour. There's this dramatic rise and fall that's very muted in the last chart, and now we can tell the max and minimum value to within a cent, right, without having any labels or anything like that. You know, it's very close to 20 cents there at the bottom and about 56 cents there at the top. So zoom and aspect ratio change the story, the message that your viewer is going to get from the chart. And sometimes that can be used to be deceitful, but also it can be used in a way that helps people pick up on what's actually in the data. In this case, you know, I think I would probably fill the slide here. This is a little bit less dramatic. And it uses the space that's available on this presentation. And it you know, it's easy to pick out what year any particular value is at. There's just one thing that I do want to point out here, though, a potential improvement that we could still make, and that is running the dollar value down to 0. Now, on a chart like this, it's going to completely depend on your data, what units you're working with, whether or not you need to be sure to include 0 on one of your axes. If we were using a bar chart, though, to show this same data, we definitely would need to include 0 on the y-axis. The reason for that is that the height of each bar is what we're looking at to compare values with each other. And if we don't include 0, then we have a distorted view of each value in terms of it doesn't correlate properly with the length of the line. But a chart like this, you could kind of leave it up to your discretion. And here I've shown it with 0 displayed. I actually like the last chart better. I think it's intuitive where 0 is off the end of the chart, and there's no distortion of the data by not including it. However, if you wanted to make a point that the price hadn't changed very much, maybe you would go ahead and include it or zoom out just a little bit, not to the extreme that we looked at before. Okay, here I pulled, so that was just the first, when I downloaded that data set, flour was the top thing that came down from the website. So that's why I started with that example. Here's all the things that you can download in the Consumer Price Index. There are so many. And I just went ahead and threw them all on one graph. And there's a bunch of colors here, but for some reason, pink just really wins. And we'll see the additional colors that are hidden here in a minute. A couple of things to notice here is that there's a lot of lines in the bottom. It's really hard to have a sense for how many lines are there. They're so crowded on top of each other. The colors are very difficult to tell apart from each other. You can see that there's some very slight variations. That's because there's so many different categories that it's difficult to discern. And then if we were to try to put like a legend, right? A legend is where you list all the colors associated with each category name. If we were to try to put that on this chart, we would need much more space than is taken up by the chart to do that, right? It'd be a huge table. So there's definitely some things we can do to improve here. This is one of the first views that I took when I looked at this data, though, and there's a few lines that stood out to me that I thought would be kind of fun to look at a little bit closer. So that's those top 3 lines that you can see there, and then down below you can see a line that's just really cyclical, up and down, especially above the 2010 range here. Let's see, I got my laser pointer. This just looked kind of interesting to me. There's also another line that was interesting to me that we can't even see in this view. So one tool that we can use to help see what's going on a chart like this is changing the axis to be a log axis. So you'll see here that these lines on the y-axis are all $50 apart, right? That's standard. We're used to seeing that. If we change to a log axis, instead of being $50 apart, they're each a factor of 10 apart. At least if we use a log base 10, we could use a different log base. So that's much less common. So here we've got 10 cents. 10 cents times 10 is $1, right? $1 times 10 is $10. You kind of get the story there. What this does is it allows us to spread out the data in the lower part of the chart and bring together the data up in the top part of the chart. So this is very useful in a lot of cases in the physical world where you have a distribution that has a long tail and you want to be able to see additional detail in one part versus another part. However, I do want to issue a word of caution here for users that are not used to not used to using a log axis. There are some intuitive mistakes that we can make. So one thing is this value up here to this value down here. If we go back to the last chart, you can see this is around $200 down to around $100. That movement right here. Down here, movements of kind of a similar vertical length are talking about much smaller dollar amounts, right? So this here is, less than 50 cents, right? So order of magnitude, even though the movement, the vertical movement on the chart is significantly, or is sort of similar. So that's something to watch for. To kind of demonstrate that point, I want you now to take these minor lines here and think of the number. What number is represented by these minor lines in between the major ones we have labeled? I know that intuitively, I kind of want to make this $5. This feels like $5 right here to me, if I were to just like hand label that out of my intuition. But I know that that's not correct. On the log axis, it's I tend to want to make it a linear axis in between labels somehow. So you have to be really careful with this, and probably maybe label some values or something if there's a specific message. So it's a very useful tool. Also has to be used with caution. Just because there's an intuitive trip up there. And this is the other line that just stood out to me. When I look at this under a log scale, this one is an outlier. It's not an outlier in terms of dollars like these ones are, but it doesn't even cross any of the other lines, right? So that's the other one that was interesting to me. So how could we tell a story from this? How could we pull out some of the data and present it to a viewer? One way that we could do that is to take those 4 lines and give them colors and kind of mute everything else a little bit. So here we've taken all the other, I put everything into like an other category and made that all, technically I made it a transparent black, but that's gray, right? But it kind of gives you a sense of where there's a lot of things lumped together, and you can see overall trends in this kind of background view here. And you also get a sense for the quantity of data that's included in this index. So I like that quite a bit. And then we've labeled these other ones. The labels still require a bit of work here though. So let's take this top line. So we've got an orange top line. So we go down through the legend. Okay, here's the orange one, utility pipe gas, 100 therms. Then this pink one here, we come down, that's electricity, 500 kilowatt hours. This green one here, utility, 40 therms. So we're just, these kind of track together, and that totally makes sense now. This blue one is wine right here. And then this purple one is electricity. So there's still kind of some back and forth you have to do with your eye to figure out what's going on this chart. We also take up a lot of space that's presenting only a low amount of data here off to the side. It's important to this graph, but we can improve it by just dropping the labels right onto the graph. Here we get to spread our data out a little bit more, use our space better, and we put these labels right next to the data, and the colors help. But also, even if all four of these lines were one color, you would still be able to figure out which line is associated with which label really quickly. So that makes this more accessible. We're going to get into the accessibility here in a sec. But this is so much quicker to decipher what's going on, with the caveat of the log axis, which you would just need to help your users understand how that log axis works to use it. So let's go back to the original axis. I just wanted to take a look at the improved chart on a normal scale, and you kind of get the sense again that these looked kind of flattish on that last log scale. Now you see the volume, the movement there going up and down, and of course electricity is completely buried. So I like to see on both scales. If I'm going to use a log scale, I feel like this scale kind of helps me keep my intuitive perspective correct by seeing both, even when down at the bottom is difficult to discern sometimes. Just as part of exploratory data analysis is what I mean there. Not that you need to present both to your viewers or something. Okay. Let's continue to talk about the accessibility a bit. Here's another chart. This is some more real data. This is from this website here, a spurious correlations collection, which is just awesome. So what this guy's done is he took thousands of data sets, and he did what we call p-hacking. He looked for correlations that are statistically significant. In other words, they have a strong correlation, but they have nothing to do with each other, right? They're not causal in any way. They're demonstrating that correlation does not imply causation. Here we've got butter consumed per person per billion kilowatt hours of wind power generated. So, who knew that by eating more butter, you were helping to generate more wind power? I don't think any of you knew this before coming into this presentation. So he has a ton of really fun data sets you can explore. This is just one that I thought was fun, so we're going to use it. Now I chose these two colors because they're particularly awful for people who struggle with color blindness. These, for me, I can see a full spectrum, and I can see one of these is kind of a brownish orangish color, and one of them is a greenish color, and they're very easy for me to see which one is which. Using our direct labels on the chart, potentially we could do something here, but these lines go, they track pretty close. So even that could be a bit of a challenge in this case. Let's look at what it can look like for people with different forms of color blindness. There's a lot of different forms. So what works for one person may not work for another person. We're going to explore that some more too. Here we've got the two lines that as I don't know, I can't pronounce this word here, but for some forms of color blindness, this is what it would look like. About 6% of people I don't know how to completely validate these numbers, but the internet seems to have quite a bit of consensus about them, and then about 2% having a form where it would look like this. And this is very uncommon. This is desaturated, meaning it's grayscale. It's all the color's been removed. One of the tips that you'll see online or circulating in social circles sometimes is that you just print the chart in grayscale, and that will give you a sense for what it would look like to someone who's colorblind. And in this case, that looks about right. We're going to explore some other color scales on a future slide, and you'll see that that does break down a little bit. This is a potential other option, though, that does make this accessible to someone who can't see all the colors, and that is to add shapes to the graph. So we still have the issue of going back and forth to a legend, but now we can easily see green. Green is associated, or butter per person is associated with the circles, and then the triangles is associated with the wind power. So that is an easy way to make pretty much any chart accessible, is by adding some shapes to the mix. Here we're going to look at some more colors. So we've got red, green, and blue here. And here's some different forms. These are kind of go in this order in terms of common, this being most common, and this, and this, and this is very uncommon. You can see here, these two colors, if you can see the full spectrum, they're quite similar. So the red and the green, and the blue stands out a lot. Here, all three colors are actually not too hard to discern. They look different, but I can tell the difference between all three of these. Here, the red stands out, and the blue and the green are fairly hard to discern. I think the size of these makes them easier, but if they were thin lines, it would be really hard to tell the difference. And then here, of course, they're indistinguishable. They're so close. Another example, here's a kind of a full rainbow scale here. We'll come back to this chart later, but just as an example of all these colors, and again, the four types of color blindness, here you can see that printing in grayscale doesn't actually give you a good sense of what it's going to look like to some people. Most people who are colorblind are going to be able to discern more color difference than this, and it's going to be different depending on the form that you have. You know, to my eye, these two look fairly similar, but this one seems to kind of have an extended scale, more towards the gray side, and then here it's like a circular, right? These two ends kind of meet, like we could run a circle. So just something to think about there when you're presenting a chart to an audience of very large size at all. It's very easy to encounter someone. About 1 in 12 people have some form of color blindness. Okay, we're going to come back to Zoom. We're going to continue to use this these horrible green and kind of brown colors here. And you can see that if someone was colorblind, you know, on the before this chart, it almost didn't matter because the lines track so closely. But now they diverge, and so you could really lose the message. The only trouble here is that the message is completely fabricated, right? We have this sense now looking at this graph that these don't correlate very well at all. This just kind of, in fact, we have the sense that they're like kind of the same, and then they depart here. But of course, they're not the same. One is in pounds and one is in kilowatt hours. That sense, that kind of intuitive sense that they're the same and then depart is not correct. And there's even the sense that it's like, well, if you really zoom in here, that the wind power is a little less than the butter per person, and then right in here it kind of like ekes out above and starts to win. And we can do that in the exact opposite way here, and you get kind of a similar message, like, oh, they're like similar with a little line crossing here, where now butter is less than wind, where most of the time wind is, sorry, let's see, butter is less than wind when most of the time butter is more than wind. And we're doing that by zooming the two y-axes apart from each other. So on this chart, we have a reasonable y-axis over here and an unreasonable one over here, and then we just flipped it. This one kind of fits the data, and now this one totally doesn't fit the data. like we saw at the beginning with the flower. Um, and the way that dual charts work makes this a very easy pitfall. I don't like to use a dual axis chart at all when the units are different. We'll look at kind of the exception when you might want to use it, but there's so much messaging that comes from a dual axis chart that's just not correct in most cases. So unless there's a real relationship between the two axes that makes sense, like you can calculate one from the other or something, which we'll see later, then generally it's going to be better to present these as two separate graphs. Let's see here. This is another appropriate way to compare the two data sets. This really is the appropriate way to compare these two data sets. So here we've taken our watt hours and our pounds and put them as the XY axes, and then we have our scale of years here. So I'm not sure that the scale is, or that the years is really an important piece of the correlation. So if we're just interested in showing the correlation, this is the perfect graph to use, a scatter plot with one unit on one side, different unit on the other side, and then we might play with zoom or perspective, but we're always going to have a set of points that go up and to the right. It could be more or less, but there's no like weirdness about intuitively thinking that there's these relationships that don't exist. Points that are close together are close together. They're showing that there's several points that have this correlation or this relationship, and all together makes the correlation. One thing that we don't want to do that sometimes you see is take this data, which gives you an intuitive sense for the quantity and the shape and how much data is where, and boil it down to just a single line. In this case, just a single basically a slope and a intercept, right? So wherever possible, like we've done earlier, we want to show the data itself. But this is an alternative that you could use that's still better than a dual axis, would be to just show the regression line, kind of the single, taking the big data set and turning it into a single summary point. This is what I think really the solution ought to be. Here we've got our butter consumed per person, our wind power generated, and then the correlation between the two. So if we really felt like all these things was really important to show, here you can see how it changes over time, and here you get a sense for the relationship between the two, without this sense that there's like they're somehow equivalent here, or that their lines are crossing each other at some weird place, depending on how you put the zoom together. If all of the data that we've looked at, all the ways of looking at this data is important to communicate to your viewer, this breaking things out into 3 charts is going to be the best solution. And I feel like I've seen a lot of charts where a ton of information is tried to be crammed onto a single graph, and you'll get like stacks of axes on both sides, right? You'll have like 3 axes with different units on the left and 4 on the right, and those can be very useful for a subject matter expert, someone who's looking at data all the time. I worked somewhere where we did partial pressure thermal heat treatments, and the graphs that got spit out from that process were very difficult to decipher. But for the subject matter experts on that machine, they were extremely useful. So I'm not saying there's no place for dual axis charts and things of that nature, but if you're trying to communicate to the broad organization and you want them to quickly get a correct understanding of the story and the data, I would steer clear of them. All right. Lastly here, I want to talk about chart chunk for a minute. This is getting back to that quote on excellence from Dr. Tufte at the beginning, where he's talking about the least ink. Here we've added some extra ink just for fun, and yet I've seen charts that are just like this. Right away, you'll notice the gray background that kind of makes it look like it's from the 90s or something. No need to put a background color anywhere. You know, if this is a black slide, like a dark theme, you know, the whole thing could be black or whatever, but like this line, this edge here doesn't mean anything, doesn't add anything. Let's just get rid of this sort of background here. Other thing is that this legend is a complete waste. All of these are labeled right on the axis here, the x-axis. So it adds absolutely no value to have a legend over here. So let's kick those two things off. The colors also didn't add any additional information because each bar is individually labeled. So there's no, you know, there's no other place where any particular color provides additional information. There's no relationship there. So we're killing the colors. So we brought this down to one color. We've gotten rid of some extra stuff. The other thing is the percent label. The percent label here doesn't add anything to this chart. We've got a percent symbol right here. Let's see, what else can we do to improve this? These ones are really hard to really discern at all a difference here. So I think we group these into an other bucket. We can go ahead and simplify that a little bit. Let's maybe rotate this axis and drop off some of these digits here that, you know, these zeros aren't adding anything. So here we go, and let's see, we've dropped off vertical axis lines also, because it's very easy to follow with your eye up and down here without needing to add extra ink there. Well, here we've taken what we initially saw was just a colorful mess down to something that's quick and easy to grasp. You know, maybe if you're really a proponent of one of these lesser known or lesser certified, less frequently certified certifications, I guess. Maybe you don't want to keep those on there. Maybe that's not appropriate to take off. But I think for just kind of getting a sense of where most certifications are taking place, we could go ahead and lump those. One thing we've skipped over is why is this okay to have a dual axis on this chart, whereas I've been pretty critical of them prior to this? Well, the reason is that the axis is not it's not showing something different on either side. It's actually just a different unit. This axis, so in other words, this point right here, it's true that it's around a little over 25,000, and it's true that it's around 20-ish% right over here, right? And this point right here is around 50K, and then a little over 30% here. So each point can be compared to both axes. It's not actually, it's adding a different unit. You could think of this as like miles per gallon and kilometers per liter, right? It's the same thing on both sides. So that's the one kind of big exception to the dual axis rule. The Pareto chart would kind of classically have this sum line here. Tufte might even disagree with including this because it doesn't actually provide any value, any additional information. It can be calculated, right? This point is just these two bars summed together. But I still like the classic Pareto line here, so I've left it on. Okay, I think we just have a little bit of further learning. If you're interested in going further with this, learning more, this book by Dr. Tufte, I would highly recommend. Visual Display of Quantitative Information. It's not going to get into specific software programs, Excel or Minitab, or whatever your favorite flavor of software is. It's all about principles of displaying information using those criteria of excellence that we started out with, that it gives the viewer ideas and doesn't take a lot of space or time to digest, and doesn't use a lot of extra ink. I made all these charts in ggplot2, so that's a software package within the R programming language. R is a similar language to Python, which is a much more popular language, but R is kind of tailored more towards statistics, and this package within R is is from my perspective, it's one of the best. But there's a steep learning curve there. So if you were interested in learning, this book could be a great place to start. But certainly don't feel like you need to learn that language in order to make great charts. I did take my code from a very similar presentation and place it up on GitHub. So you could take a look there and see kind of what you would be getting into there if you're interested in learning more about creating charts that way. Okay, with that, let me know what questions you have there.
Okay, Jameson, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. We've got a couple questions on here with your last one, your last slide with talking about this quantity certified. One of the questions was, why wouldn't you have picked like 25K or 50K for the max?
For the max. Oh, excellent question. Yeah, so one thing that you'll see people do with these Pareto charts is you'll see them do exactly that. They'll take around, in this case we could probably use 30K or 40K as the max right here. And then this first dot on this cumulative sum line will come all the way down really close to the bottom, and it will go up to this 100 point. So this axis here would be much more zoomed in, right? All of this white space would be gone from the bars, and then this line would look very similar. So the reason though that we don't do that is because then we destroy the relationship between the two axes. Now we've fallen into a dual axis pitfall, and you get this sense that the cumulative sum like crosses over the bars, right? Because this bar would be really tall, and this bar would be really tall, and probably somewhere in here you'd see like this line coming out over the top of the bars. And so this relationship back and forth would be lost. 100% is 150,000 certifications. So what this is doing is summing this for us. It's telling us the math of what is, if I sum up each of these bars, that's 150,000 certifications. So if we were to drop this cumulative sum line, I totally would do that. I would not go up to 150K, but if I want to keep this cumulative sum, this kind of classic Pareto piece, then we need to keep this zoomed the way it is, or else not use a matched up left and right axis, which I'm saying we shouldn't do. But you will see it. You'll see Pareto charts where this dot does not line up with the first bar, and in that case, you cannot compare bars and lines to both axes.
Good answer. And this was one of my own questions too. I thought it was interesting. The labeling that you did on the lines, how did you do that?
Let's see. So let's use like this one, for
Yeah,
example.
perfect.
Yeah, so I did this in if we're really getting into kind of tactical nuts and bolts, I did this in ggplot. So you can kind of delve into the code there. If I wanted to make this chart, for example, in like Excel or kind of a typical GUI, graphical user interface software, I would take you're going to have a column that has all these, or perhaps either a column name or a row in a column, however your data is structured, that's going to have this name in it so that the chart knows what name to put in there. So you would just take these names and save them, and then all the other names you would call other, right? And then typically your software is going to say, okay, these lines are all the same, and then these lines are different. And then in terms of labeling right on the graph, I've struggled to find a software program that does this well automatically. So using my software, it was kind of a pain to do some finessing here, but probably a lot easier to just use a text box and go ahead and move it right on, type it right on there and move it on. So you'll have to do a little bit of work to make sure you're labeling the right items, right? But if you kept your legend in until you had everything labeled and then removed your legend, you should be able to do that. Good question.
We've got time for one more question here. Which font style do you recommend? Obviously, simple block style instead of fancy one. Correct is what they're asking.
I do obviously. I have read quite a bit of people who feel very strongly about sans serif and serif fonts and stuff. I don't know that I am completely sold on whether or not one is better than the other. So I tend to like just really basic, simple fonts. That's just kind of my style. I like basic and not the curly cues and serifs and things like that. But I'm probably the wrong guy to ask. I honestly don't think that it maybe makes as much difference as some people say it does. So some people are gonna feel really strongly about that, and I'm not one of those people.
I understand that. I had a professor that I worked for that was very picky about what type of font, but I never could really tell the difference with when the
Yeah,
presentation.
yeah, yep, I totally relate there.
Well, thank you so much. It was fantastic. Those of you who didn't get your questions answered, we'll see if we can get them answered in the network section. Um, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Thank you, everyone, and hope you have a great rest of your conference. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Take care.